Following an Israeli strike on a port in Yemen, increasing attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, and a Houthi promise of further escalation, the West's approach to Iran faces serious questions. Seemingly rooted in the idea that military disengagement and appeasement towards Iran and its proxies in the Middle East would lower tensions and build bridges, international policy, led by the US, has focused on limiting the damage from Iran-backed drone and missile attacks and allowing Tehran access to hundreds of billions of dollars. In one sense, US policy towards Iran proxy attacks has been a mirror of its nuclear policy: relax sanctions, send money, and don't respond to any aggression in the hope that Iran will eventually play nice. But with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken's recent acknowledgement that Iran could now be weeks from weapons-grade nuclear material, it may now be time to accept that much like attempts to curtail Iran's uranium enrichment, the West's approach to Iran has simply failed. Iran's role in the current state of global tension and violence is increasingly hard to miss. It was Iran-backed Hamas fighters that attacked Israel in October last year, leading to the Israeli invasion and the ongoing war in Gaza. Iran's proxies in Yemen have essentially closed the Red Sea to trade through their constant attacks on shipping, leading to a 66% drop in shipping through the Suez Canal that is responsible for 12% of global trade. Iran has also sold thousands of drones to Russia for its war in Ukraine, allowing Russia to continue its bombardment of Ukraine despite Western sanctions aimed at limiting access to vital military components. And Iran's continued push to enrich uranium far past the levels needed for peaceful energy production signal a clear intent to develop nuclear weapons. And yet the West's response to all of this has simply been to stand back. Efforts to deal with Houthi drone and missile strikes on commercial shipping that are driving up costs and killing civilians have amounted to little more than limited strikes by the US and British, with a focus instead on shooting down the weapons after they've been launched. No attempt has been made to deal with the fact that these weapons fired at civilian shipping are coming from Iran, beyond the occasional interception of weapons bound for Yemen by the US military. And given the Houthis' increasing capabilities, these seizures evidently aren't scratching the surface. And yet despite all of this, the US reissued a sanctions waiver earlier this month, allowing Iran to access $10 billion in frozen funds. This follows a previous $10 billion waiver in July last year, and an additional 2 further waivers in between. But of even greater concern has been the US turning a blind eye to Iranian oil sales by failing to enforce existing sanctions. This non-enforcement is arguably the bigger issue, resulting in an estimated $100 billion of oil sold under the current administration. According to Bloomberg, US officials privately acknowledge they've gradually relaxed some enforcement of sanctions on Iranian oil sales, leading to Iran's highest oil production in 5 years. At this point, it's difficult to think of current Iran policy as anything other than a failure, and even harder to argue against a significant change in tack, and there have been some signs of this. Britain, France, and Germany have started pushing back in the UN against Iran's nuclear enrichment, bringing up the possibility of further sanctions and calling on Iran to honor its commitments. But even here, there were reports that the US was pushing back against its allies' plans to rebuke Iran for its continuing enrichment. US policy has all the appearance of being 10 years out of date, maintaining Obama-era diplomacy in a world that has radically changed. Perhaps of most concern is that the current policy of appeasement aimed at reducing conflict may ultimately have the opposite effect, something we could be starting to see with Israel's attack on a port in Yemen this weekend. With the absence of any meaningful international attempt to contain attacks from Iran and its proxies, these attacks have continued to increase and expand, leading to the recent Israeli intervention. Without a serious coordinated response, the situation is likely to deteriorate further, and as Iran continues its pursuit of nuclear weapons, the possibility of something like an Israeli strike on Iranian nuclear facilities becomes ever more likely.